I will give some few questions, but in the meantime, if there's anybody who want raise any questions, please pass it to our staff, so that I could easily cluster, the questions. I hope it might be as succinct as possible. My question, to both, Professor Yen and Doc, is that both of you, in accordance with your, description, the U.S.-China relationship are suffering from another replica of the another Cold War. So maybe yes, there are many confrontational area, but as third parties, the situation gets much a little improved. One of the distinct, clear-cut, example is the U.S.-China cooperation in climate change negotiation. During the Copenhagen, the COP15, climate summit, it failed because, the U.S. and China distrust each other. So at that time, the prisoner's dilemmas rule was applied. It's a very typical case, I believe. But 6 years later, in France, U.S. and China work as co-locomotive to have international community have legally binding international agreement. So it's great work, as a result of the coordination between two powers. So one of my assessment on even the South China Sea issues, I think the confrontational feature is a little exaggerated, because as long as the United States is exercise absolute predominant naval powers around the world, I think maybe 20 or 30 years later, I don't know, but for the decade to come, there might be, the problem should be management. How reduce the confrontational, the possibilities. So, for example, in case of the China side, the clarification of 9-day lines, or the future of the arbitrational, the court decision between China and Philippines will be good gestures, toward some coming up. Toward making some general rules, to govern and in the ocean area. So that is my impression, is that there's many that kind of the dilemma is a little more a little exaggerated. That is my initial comment, but I want to response both of you. On the Korean Peninsula issues, to Doc, the North Korea, recently North Korea implied, to our surprise, that North Korea will exercise the first nuclear strike. That is almost officially implied. So the Russian side made immediate, immediate warnings against, that kind of implication. So why, even during the Wu Dawei's visit to China, the Wu Dawei mentioned that, it is reported that during his stay in North Korea, North Korean side emphasized again and again, North Korea will not use nuclear, they will not make any first strike. But I don't know what happened, what changed during the couple months or weeks time. So how we could deal with such kind of new threatening, by exercising first nuclear strike. So that is my questions to Doug and Professor Yan. You emphasize that the Chinese influence on North Korea is declining. So in that case, maybe yes, maybe not. But from my point of view, I got some impression that China is enjoying the sense of complacency. You know, after 2009, you know, the foreign affairs leading group of Communist Party decision. I mean, 中央外事工作领导小组2009. At that time, till that time, Chinese pillar position toward the North Korean was summarized in two things. One is maintenance of the peace and security of Korean Peninsula. And second pillar is denuclearization of Korean Peninsula whole. But it is understanding, it's my understanding that during that important meetings, they discussed what if these two pillars conflict each other. So it is our general understanding that that at that time, Chinese government put priorities, maintaining peace and security, over denuclearization. So maybe that kind of decision, I'm not sure, I don't know, I have no way to confirm that decision, whether this is true or not. But if it is true that North Korea, China already gave such impression that, as long as peace and security is maintained, China will overlook any denuclearization process. So now I think now it's high time for Chinese party or government to make a clear message. No. Denuclearization is our priority. So we changed our mind. So maybe I think China should send such kind of signal. So maybe on top of the application of very massive sanction. So maybe I want to get your response to that question. And third, to Professor Chung, you made some very interesting assessment on the role of the strategic patience by current U.S. government during several years. You have some, I got some impression that you have some reservation on the validity of such, the U.S. strategic patience. So can you elaborate why, do you have such kind of observation? And if we have some hindsight, what should be done, to improve, to utilize the last several years in terms of tactical approaches? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Park. To take your very specific question to me first on the issue of first use of nuclear weapons or first strike capability, I think it's too early to say what the intention of Kim Jong-un or his people is at this time. I'm certainly no veteran of the Korean War remaining in the upper circles of the KWP or the SDC can believe that engaging in conflict will leave Korea any better off than it was, North Korea, any better off than it was at the end of Korean War, when there was barely a brick upon a brick in the North. And a nuclear war will be even worse. So one has to assume this is firing for effect, making some broad statements to try to leverage this very small but growing nuclear capability into something more, whether it's security or economic benefit or just influence for the North. It may just be an irrational departure for the moment, or maybe something more sinister. If I may address the broader questions that you raised, I think that the three of us on the panel today, and I'm very pleased to be among these gentlemen, we were all describing, like three blind men describing an elephant, but I think we were all describing pretty much the same elephant, which is a China that's not going to be going very far to be helpful, that we're going to have to work hard to persuade to do things that will help to sustain the stability on the peninsula and to restrain the capacity to express that instability both on the peninsula and farther afield. The U.S. and China basis for cooperation under the climate change agreement, that was a substantial agreement. It was done mostly for the reasons of each state in its own way, but it does have consequences for the globe, and that should not be dismissed. But I think in the hunger for cooperation, there's been an overselling of the results of that as implying a much broader range of areas of cooperation between the U.S. and China, and I would not want to extend the implications of this agreement beyond reality. And then on the South China Sea, as you mentioned, I share your view that the tension there has been exaggerated. We've tended to turn to rhetoric and media exploitation when we didn't really have an alternative way to check this Chinese sub-military pursuit of its interests in the region. They don't quite go far enough to provoke us or our friends to military action and response, but they come very close. And I think in frustration with that process, we've turned to the nearest microphone rather than to more substantial means to respond to what China's doing. I believe I'm seeing some adjustment in the U.S. posture on this, but it's going to take some time to make a more qualified judgment on it. Thank you.
I like the question about the cooperation between China and the U.S. on the issue of the climate change at the Paris. And actually, many people in China and the U.S. argue that, and this cooperation is based on mutual trust. Actually, from my understanding, I don't think this cooperation has anything to do with the mutual trust. And there's no mutual trust between China and the U.S. And the all cooperation based on our shared interests. No matter we have the trust or not, the cooperation, as long as we have shared interests, then we have a cooperation. And you know, I have a coughing, and so in China, especially in Beijing, everyone hate that. And you cannot breathe freely, and and you get coughing every day. Certainly we need to, and we have to clean our air, so reduce the CO2. In the US, the same thing. Maybe their pollution a little bit better than us, but then the people also complain about they need a green energy. So in this way, I think we have both domestic interests overlap. So we developed the cooperation on the climate change. And concerning the question about about South China Sea, I think this competition between China and the U.S. over the South China Sea is quite peaceful. And by now, there's no military clash. There's no fair exchange. And I think very peaceful. Both sides already developed an approach and called under the name of transparency. And the transparency strategy make both sides can effectively manage the competition and make them peacefully compete against each other. And the typical case is that when American sent their warship to China, and 10 days ago they released the news on the newspaper, and then they say, okay, this report has already sent to the White House, and then next they say the president is already reading the report. The day after they say, okay, president signed this report, and then they said, okay, this report sent to the Pacific Command. And then 2 days later, the Pacific Command said, okay, we are going to send our warship within 3 days. And then next day, they tell the world that, okay, the ship is shipping, that tomorrow they will go there. And then when the ship get there, everyone knows it. So, okay, we know your ship is coming. Okay, then China, okay, we protest. So now this it becomes very, very interesting. Both sides use this strategy. Transparency do not surprise the other side. So the competition is very stable. So from my understanding, the peaceful competition is inevitable. And I don't know, I do not argue it's good, but at least it's not that harmful, not that dangerous. And so the competition between China and the US is much better, much more peaceful than the competition between US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And I think if we can maintain the competition between these two countries like that, we should feel satisfied with it. Yeah. And the third question about the North Korea's preemptive strike. Well, by now, and except this nuclear bomb in 1945, and all of these countries adopted a preemptive strategy and never implement that strategy. And U.S. insist on preemptive strike, but they never did it. And except China, by now no nuclear powers and promise no preemptive strike. China is the only country and promise that we only do the second strike. So, but now we firmly believe those countries who insist on preemptive strike, dare not to strike first. So the nuclear weapon is so different. And anyone launch a nuclear weapon, from my understanding, also means the end of the day of their own country. So talking about what's the priority for Chinese government for maintaining peace in this region or the denuclearization. From my understanding, maintaining peace is not China's first priority. It's also first priority of the South Korea and the US. And if not your first priority, I just wonder why in the last 20 years, your government is so hesitated to launch a war. Why? I can understand. You're so desperate to denuclearize North Korea, but no one talking about, okay, let's go to war tomorrow. So obviously, because you gave the first priority to peace, so you do not want to use the denuclearization to break up the peace. So it's not China gave the priority to the peace, everyone. So no different. So here, and I found that toward China, people's view about China's policy towards North Korea is really very interesting. Just now, Professor Zheng argued that, and he don't think China's policy toward North Korea changed substantially. This is so familiar because our propaganda ministry, every day they say that, no, our policy toward North Korea South Korea never changed. Our policy toward the South Korea is the same. So here we hear people that hold the same view like our propaganda ministry. So from my understanding, whether China adjusts its policy toward North Korea, that's its objective facts. It's not based on the people's interpretation. So finally, I will say, and China in this region, and we really face a new situation. Is that every country have to reconsidering how to deal with the situation when North Korea will continue move on its on the path of nuclear program without stop. And we just continue to talk another 24 years, or we're really looking for a solution. That's the serious issue.
Is it? Okay. I think this question about strategic patience, better to be answered by Doug, but since the question was posed to me, I'll try to answer it. I guess I'm not the only one who has been critical of this strategic patience concept, because my friends and colleagues in Washington, D.C. used to tell me there was barely no policy, and that was basically what it means. But I think the mainstay of that particular concept is that basically Americans did not trust North Koreans. So if that were true, then now if sanctions really work well, North Korea comes out to the negotiation table, Americans will have the exactly the same dilemma. How can you trust them now? Given the fact that They might have diversified the sources and sites of all those tests in the past couple of years. Where is the basis of trust, judging trust then? So that's, and another question is, which is an interesting one. I'm not quite sure how many people can actually subscribe to this view, but after the third test, Americans were not that active in dealing with this particular issue. But after the fourth test, Americans became more active in dealing with the issue. Why this suddenly heightened degree of activism on the part of Washington, D.C.? I think this is a very interesting question for us to explore. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I got some questions. So the first question is that North Korea profits from trade and aid with, DPRK, North Korea profits from trade and aid with China equals more than 50% of North Korea's 6 billion military budget. So China should reduce trade and aid. So there is the first question. I'm not sure, the statistics is right or not. But if I add just one thing, maybe in case of the coal, the import amount of coal from North Korea is around $1 billion as of 2014. Out of 7.4 total import. So, but the Security Council Resolution 2270 for the first time have some sanctional, the measures on the import of coals, even though there are some qualification languages. So that's why now we are paying much attention, how it will work. So maybe, Professor Yan, you give some rough idea. Or you will respond later or now?
I can do it later.
Okay, later, okay. The second question is that the same, addressed to Professor Yan. So popular. So the essence of the North Korean nuclear dilemma is coming from the fact that North Korea do not perceive China as the real threat. They just think, China as an empty threat. So that's why China should apply more dialect and very vigorous, environment to have North Korea feel that China is a real, in a sense, the threat or real, game changers. So that is my second question. And then third question is, it's very, very general and popular question, but just you don't have to be so serious. But I'd like to raise these questions, to pick up your some general ideas. The question is that like this: in this situation, the U.S. and China really want reunification of Korea. That is the question. Thank you. Yeah, to both of you.
Well, let me before responding to these questions you've just raised, speak to the issue of strategic patience. I've heard the phrase used many times. I've never heard it used officially. I'm not sure that the strategic patience has any official standing. And I would offer as a counter to the proposition that it was official officially the U.S. position, that shortly after Mr. Obama entered office, he reached out to Iran and North Korea and other states. His reward for reaching out to North Korea was the third nuclear test. And then, by my count, there were 5 other public and not so public efforts to try to start a new basis of communication. In each one, South Korea was wholly participating in the consultations leading up to it. And in each case, there was a response that was negative. Invitations for the North Korean negotiator to come to New York, and we had the Cheonan incident. Invitation again for him to come to New York and start talks, and we had the Yeonbyung-do shelling. And it goes on and on right down to very recent times with the February 29 agreement that didn't last a month in 2011, I believe, maybe 2012. This has not been a patient program, but it's an exhausted program. How do you go to the relevant people in the government and say, I want to try again to get insulted by North Korea by opening a new round of secret or not so secret talks? So I think that's one part of what constitutes this perception there's been strategic patience. The second part is an estimation of North Korea's ability to take its incipient launch and weaponization capabilities and then industrialize them to the point where they're a threat to the U.S. And there's a lot of skepticism at how far that can go beyond token weapons, which are important, but you don't mount a broad national strategy against an enemy who's could be compared, I don't know, some of the young people here probably don't know what I'm going to talk about, but olders may remember the movie The Mouse That Roared with Peter Sellers. If you don't remember it, look it up on your computer. But it was a little Grand Duchy in Europe wanted to be defeated by the United States to get the benefit of American aid after being defeated. So they sent their soldiers over to steal a secret weapon from an American lab, and they succeeded in doing it and took it back by a tugboat to Europe to try to threaten the U.S. with this one bomb. I think a lot about North Korea is captured in that film. I recommend it to you for some Saturday night if there's nothing better on television. And then, the additional question was? I think there's no doubt the United States has been in favor of unification. And someone earlier talked about U.S. restraint and failure to press for militarily when we've had crises with North Korea. The American government's been very conscious of the fact that there are 17,000 artillery pieces north of Seoul that could rain devastation down on the population of this city and elsewhere. And therefore, it would be, well, short of crazy, or maybe crazy, to think that we can maybe target a surgical strike on a launch capability or a weapons capability and not have horrendous consequences for our friends in South Korea. That doesn't diminish the fact that the U.S. still stands consistently behind efforts to reunify if they can be found, if a way to reunify can be found that will be, in first priority, a peaceful way.
I think I have 2 questions. One is about the trade between China and North Korea, and the second is about the China's North Korea do not feel the threat from China. And first, and from my understanding, both China and North Korea keep the number of the trade volume between these 2 countries a secret. I doubt anyone knows how much. And so this kind of data, generally speaking, from my understanding, based on the imagination rather than on serious research. Just like when the North Korea, we know North Korea possibly to conduct a nuclear test, people say, no, North Korea dare not. Why? They said they don't have enough the nuclear material. At most, they have 2, for 2 bombs. If they have a test and failed, so they cannot do the second, because if they do second test, there's no material left, so they're meaningless. So at that time, people based on the imagination that North Korea has a limited nuclear material for developing nuclear weapons. Now they already have 5. So now those experts and who estimate North Korea has a very limited nuclear materials disappear. And that means, from my understanding, the people provide this kind of data. They never take any responsibility for it. And they just say it, and then they forget it. So for me, it's very difficult to make comments about on this kind of data. The second about North Korea do not feel China is a threat. That's true. I think that's why China suggests the North Korea's motivation for nuclear weapon is not because of China. It's because of the threat from the South Korea and the US. So now the reason for North Korea to go to nuclear program is because US and South Korea rather than China. So I think now we are talking about how to denuclearize that rather than how to make North Korea to improve their nuclear capability. So if China composes you add a threat to North Korea, that means you make North Korea more determined to go to nuclear weapons, right? So from my understanding, we should understand what's the goal. The goal is to denuclear nuclear, or you want to not make North Korea more determined to improve their nuclear capability. So in that way, I think China's policy is reasonable and don't become the threat to the North Korea. And whether the South Korea and the US want to reduce your threat to North Korea, that's your policy. From my understanding, the more you increase your threat to North Korea, they will become more determinative to have their nuclear program. And the final thing is that, and I understand that because your relationship with North Korea is not that friendly. Even we can tell from the title of this conference, the handling and the dealing with the North Korea is not a policy toward the North Korea. So the dealing with obviously is not a friend term. So actually, that makes, I think it's understandable. You hope all of the countries become the enemy of North Korea. That's where in favor of your interests. But then you also have to concern and why every country want to be the enemy of North Korea. Just like if every country wants South Korea, hey, you should be enemy of my enemy. Can you do that? That's very difficult.
So maybe, President, do you want to make some comment on unification?
Unification? Yes. Well, this question seems to me is irrelevant at this moment. And the relationship between North Korea and South Korea becomes so intense. And the chance, the opportunity for peaceful unification becomes slighter and slighter. And there's, from my understanding, the only available, or maybe the available approach is to unite the two countries through war. Meanwhile, I doubt either of you want to go to the war. If the South Korea and North Korea do not want to go to war, meanwhile, you continue make the relationship getting worse and worse. How can you unite it with each other? I don't know.
Thanks so much. Maybe the question is, the answers to the old questions which raised by myself and like Minister Yoon is not an easy one. So we cannot expect some outspoken, immediate answers overnight. But what I could say as of now is that we hope China and the United States will be more cooperative in dealing with North Korean nuclear issues. From whatever motive, as you mentioned, from necessity or kind of the mutual trust. So on top of that, I'm very proud that we could have this kind of very interactive trilateral talk. So I promise all of you to continue this kind of session whenever we need and we think appropriate. If I just give some final say on why we use the word engaging, with my North Korean cousins, is unavoidable as long as they remain as serious violators of the UN security regulations and the WMD orders. So I hope someday will come soon, when we should change the words into other words. Thank you so much. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.